and start the next talk. I'm actually giving the next talk. I am a quantitative ecologist with the National Park Service South Florida Natural Resources Center. My name is Andrea Atkinson, and I work with Agnes McLean and Betsy Evans to help everyone pull together the interim goals and interim targets recommendations into the resulting report. I'm giving the talk on CERP water supply and flood protection interim targets. I currently serve on the Recover Executive Committee and have over 20 years of experience in environmental monitoring programs across the country. With that, let's go ahead and get started.
Welcome, friends. I'm here to talk about water supply and flood protection interim targets for CERP. My name is Andrea Atkinson. I'm with the National Park Service South Florida Natural Resources Center. And our interim targets team unfortunately couldn't be here today, but Rebecca Elliott and Karen Smith put together most of this talk. Interim targets, like interim goals, are required in the CERP programmatic regulations as a means to evaluate the success of CERP in providing for other water-related needs of the region, including water supply and flood protection. Now, Agnes McLean covered most of the background in the first presentation in the session, but as a quick overview, the models used were the regional simulation model with 41 years of weather and hydrology simulated from 1965 to 2005. Model scenarios used were the 2017 existing condition baseline, 2026, 2032 CEP, and the 2032 PACR. Some critical assumptions to keep aware of is that sea level rise and climate change were not included, and projects authorized post-2018, such as COP, were not included. The interim targets indicators include water volume, water supply for the Lake Okeechobee service area, water supply for the Lower East Coast service area, Biscayne Aquifer Protection minimum flows and levels, Biscayne Aquifer Protection in South Miami-Dade, and flood protection in the root zone in the South Miami-Dade agricultural area. To make forecasts of each scenario's effect on water volume, a water budget analysis was done on each of the 4 scenarios, which is basically looking at the flows in and flows out of each basin and calculating how much was actually used within each area. Then our different scenarios were compared against each other to determine where additional water was made available in the system. For example, if you look at the green box at the bottom, in the 2026 scenario, about 319,000 acre-feet were estimated to be made available, versus the 2032 PACR scenario, where 565,000 acre-feet were made available. Now, looking at the 2032 PACR scenario in the left-hand graph, it's saying that 73% of the additional water made available came from the northern estuaries. And if you remember in our previous presentations, the northern estuaries have the issues that they were getting too much fresh water going through the estuaries, causing sudden changes in the salinity and resulting in habitat that was too fresh for our oysters. Thus, trying to make the hydrology more ecologically healthy for the northern estuaries can free up water for other parts of the system. Now, looking at the right-hand graph at the recipients of this water, the majority of this water is going into Everglades National Park and then into the southern estuaries. 20% of the water is consumed in Everglades National Park and Big Cypress, and another 36% consumed in the southern estuaries. 31% is going into the lower East Coast, of which part of this is due to seepage. Okay, so under water supply, basically the models were used to forecast the frequency, duration, and severity of water supply restrictions that were imposed on both the lower East Coast service area and the Lake Okeechobee service area. And basically, they're looking at the number of shortages, how many months they were, and how severe, what the severity classification of the shortage is. So for water supply for the Lower East Coast service area, in Palm Beach, we're seeing on average about 2 less water shortages across the 41-year period Broward had one more, and Miami-Dade basically had no change, although there was a small increase in the number of months of shortages. Now, this needs to be put into context because in the 2032 scenarios, an additional 17 million gallons per day was modeled as being pumped out of the public water supply well fields. So even with this additional pumping, there was essentially no change in the number of water shortages that was occurring in the area. And even the ones that did occur were of phase one. So they're not the severe type of shortage. So for the Lake Okeechobee service area, basically you're seeing the largest change and reduction in the frequency, the duration, and the severity of water shortages occurring in the 2032 Packer scenario. So we're actually getting to around at times a 50% reduction in the number of months and in the severity score of water supply shortages. Okay, so regarding protecting the Biscayne Aquifer from saltwater intrusion, basically the Biscayne Aquifer is what's shaded in yellow in the map on the right and is the main potable water supply for the lower East Coast. Many of the public water supply well fields are near the coast, so saltwater intrusion is a concern. In 2001, a minimum flows and levels prevention strategy was adopted, which basically specifies the water levels that should be maintained in the canals with salinity control structures in order to protect the aquifer. The modeling of the different scenarios showed that in Palm Beach, Broward, and North and Central Miami-Dade, that these targets were able to be met at 10 of the 11 structures. However, for the South Dade structures in the red box, which were not included in this prevention strategy and had target canal stages separately developed, only one of the 4 structures were able to meet these targets under these forecast scenarios. So this area will need to be watched in the future. However, the targets themselves may need to be reevaluated in the light of real-world operational conditions and considerations. With regards to flood protection in the root zone in the South Miami-Dade agricultural area, the modeling focused on 6 different indicator cells. You'll see them in pink on the map, plus the ability of the structures to handle the increased flows. For the most part, the flood protection wasn't an issue, with the exception of the area around cell 4328 at the tip of the red arrow. In this area, flooding in the root zone did double. However, on the next slide, we'll show you how COP appears to resolve this issue. Okay, so when you look at the map on the left of the 2032 Packer scenario minus its existing condition baseline, anything that's bluer on this map is getting wetter. And on the right-hand map is the COP Alt Q alternative versus its existing condition baseline. And again, anything that's bluer on this map is getting wetter. They're not exactly one for one, but they give you an idea. And so on the left-hand map in the red circled area is where that indicator cell was showing that the interim targets were modeling was projecting the area getting wetter in the root zone. Versus on the COP modeling, it's showing that there isn't expected to be any problem in this area. So it appears that COP is going to be solving this problem for us, but it's going to need to be watched in the future just to make sure. Okay, to sum things up, most of the progress that we see towards interim targets appears in the 2032 scenarios. With regards to water volume, the 2032 scenarios predict an increase in water quantities over the existing condition baseline to benefit both the natural systems and the developed areas. And with regards to the water supply for the lower East Coast service area, despite allowing an additional 17 million gallons per day for public water supply pumping in 2032, there are no associated change in the water shortages. And additionally, the 2032 Packer scenario didn't really show an improvement over the 2032 CERP scenario. With regards to water supply for lower Lake Okeechobee service area, The 2032 Packer scenario is what showed the greatest impact, and water shortages in that scenario were actually cut in half. With regards to the protection of the Biscayne Aquifer, all the incremental scenarios basically performed about the same. In Palm Beach, Broward, and North Central Miami-Dade, the models forecasted meeting of the minimum flows and level prevention strategy and protecting the aquifer from significant harm at 10 of the 11 salinity structures. Now, the story is a little different in South Miami-Dade, where only one of the 4 salinity structures was able to meet the target criteria. So we're going to want to keep an eye on this area in the future. With regards to flood protection, the forecasted scenarios did predict a problem area, but when we looked at the predictions of COP, it appears that COP should resolve this problem area. So this shouldn't be a problem going into the future. Okay, moving on to a quick wrap up of interim goals and interim targets overall. Okay, so we'll be working to report on progress towards our interim goals and targets in the real world every 5 years, with the idea of trying to combine this with the system status report. Also, every 5 years, we have to assess whether an update is needed to these goals and targets. However, we have to be cautious because it takes considerable staff time to conduct all this modeling, analyses, and report writing. Some big picture take-home messages. Overall, the model's forecasts do show substantial progress towards reaching our ecosystem goals while also meeting our needs for water supply and flood protection. However, the hydrologic and ecological needs of the greater Everglades ecosystem are still not fully achieved by 2032. Projects that were not included in the modeling, such as the Lake Okeechobee System Operation Manual and COP, will be playing key roles in achieving these goals. And we are going to need to monitor our system to see how well these forecasts are actualized in the real world and respond to changing real world conditions. I want to say a big thank you to all the many people involved with the modeling and reporting, including the Interim Targets team, Interim Goals regional teams, our Interagency Modeling Center, the Joint Ecosystem Modeling Group, and our many, many reviewers. Okay, so now I'd like to open things up for questions.